It was the last day of college, and everyone was excited. The air was filled with laughter, cheers, and the bittersweet feeling of saying goodbye. We had plans to take pictures, sign yearbooks, and spend the night celebrating our journey together. I, however, had mixed feelings. As much as I loved my friends, I always felt a strange unease about the old building at the back of the campus. This building, known as Willow Hall, was abandoned long before we started college. Some said it was unsafe, others whispered that it was haunted. The broken windows and faded paint only added to its eerie appearance. Over the years, stories circulated about strange noises, flickering lights, and shadows that moved on their own. That evening, while we sat together under the big oak tree, laughing and reminiscing, someone suggested we explore Willow Hall one last time. I shook my head immediately. No way, that place gives me the creeps. But my best friend Mia grinned mischievously. Come on, Emily, it's our last day. Don't you want one final adventure? The others chimed in, and before I knew it, I was reluctantly agreeing. We grabbed flashlights and headed toward the building as the sun dipped below the horizon. The closer we got, the colder the air felt. The doors creaked as we pushed them open, and a faint, musty smell greeted us. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like forgotten memories. All right, let's split up and explore, Mia said, her voice echoing in the empty hall. No way, I protested. We stay together. Everyone laughed, but they agreed. We moved as a group, our footsteps echoing in the silence. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, and the furniture was broken and scattered. Despite the dust, it felt like someone, or something, had been there recently. In one of the rooms, we found an old diary lying on a desk. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed with age. Curious, Mia picked it up and began reading. The diary belonged to a student named Eleanor, who had lived in Willow Hall many years ago. Her entries started out normal, talking about classes and friends. But as we flipped through, they grew darker. Eleanor wrote about feeling watched, hearing whispers, and seeing figures in the mirrors. I don't like this, I said, my voice trembling. Relax, Emily. It's just an old diary, Mia replied, but even she sounded uneasy. We decided to leave the room, but as we turned, the door slammed shut. Startled, we all jumped and our flashlights flickered. Who did that? Sam, one of our friends, asked nervously. It wasn't me, I whispered. The atmosphere grew heavier as we continued exploring. In the hallway, we heard footsteps that weren't ours. Shadows danced on the walls, even though there was no light source. Then we came to a staircase leading to the basement. None of us wanted to go down, but curiosity got the better of Mia. She convinced us to follow her, promising we'd only look for a minute. The basement was colder than the rest of the building. The walls were damp, and the air smelled of mildew. In the center of the room was an old mirror, its surface cracked and tarnished. Don't touch it, I warned as Mia approached. But she didn't listen. As soon as she placed her hand on the frame, the mirror began to glow faintly. Our flashlights flickered again, and a low hum filled the room. Let's get out of here, I shouted. Before we could move, the reflection in the mirror changed. It no longer showed us. Instead, it displayed a group of students dressed in old-fashioned clothes. They looked terrified, their mouths open in silent screams. Suddenly, one of the figures turned to face us directly. Its eyes were hollow, and its face was pale as if it hadn't seen sunlight in years. Mia screamed, and the mirror shattered. Shards flew everywhere, but none of them hit us. Instead, they hovered in the air, spinning faster and faster until they vanished. The hum stopped, and silence returned, but the feeling of dread remained. We ran out of the basement, through the hallways, and out of Willow Hall without looking back. When we reached the safety of the campus lawn, we finally stopped to catch our breath. What just happened? Sam asked, his voice shaking. I don't know, Mia replied, clutching the diary tightly. We looked at the old building one last time. In the moonlight, it seemed darker than ever, as if it was watching us. That night, none of us slept well. The events in Willow Hall haunted our dreams, and the feeling of being watched never truly went away. Years later, I still think about that day. Willow Hall was demolished shortly after we graduated, but the memories remain. And sometimes, when I look in a mirror, I think I see a shadow that doesn't belong. After that day, none of us spoke much about what happened. It wasn't just fear. It was the unshakable feeling that we'd disturbed something that wasn't meant to be found. Mia insisted on keeping the diary. She said it was evidence of what we'd experienced, though I thought it was a terrible idea. Every time I saw it peeking out of her bag or resting on her desk, I felt that same cold dread from the basement creeping over me. Over the summer break, we went our separate ways, but the group chat was quieter than usual. No jokes, no photos, no plans. It was as if Willow Hall had drained all the excitement out of us. One day, Mia called me. She never sounded scared before. Mia was always bold, sometimes to a fault, but that day her voice was trembling. "Emily," she whispered, "the diary, it's not normal." I frowned, switching the phone to my other hand. "What are you talking about?" "There are new pages," she said, her words tumbling out quickly. "They're written in my handwriting, but I didn't write them. It's like I'm reading my thoughts from a dream." A chill ran down my spine. "You're joking, right?" "I'm not," she snapped, and then she lowered her voice again. "The last entry, Emily. It talks about you." My grip tightened on the phone. "What does it say?" "It says you need to see the mirror again." "That you..." She stopped abruptly. What does it say?" I demanded. She hesitated before continuing, her voice barely above a whisper. "It says you won't be able to leave until you face it." I felt my stomach drop. "Mia, burn the diary, destroy it." "I tried," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "I tried burning it, tearing it apart. It won't work. The diaries, it's like it heals itself." A few days later, Mia disappeared. Her parents filed a police report, but there were no leads. The last person to see her was Sam, who said Mia was acting strange. She told him she needed to go back to campus, but she didn't explain why. I couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with the diary and Willow Hall. Against every instinct, I decided to return to campus and search for answers. The old building was gone, replaced with a leveled patch of land. Grass had started to grow there, but the area still had an eerie quietness. I wasn't alone, though. Sam had also come back, unable to get over his guilt for not stopping Mia. Together, we retraced our steps from that terrifying night. We started at the basement site. The workers who demolished Willow Hall left behind strange marks on the ground. Deep grooves in a circular pattern were etched into the concrete foundation, exactly where the mirror had been. "I think it's still here," I said, staring at the marks. Sam looked at me, confused. "What do you mean? The mirror's gone." "No," I whispered. "It's underneath us." At that moment, Sam's phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. We both stared at the screen. "Help me, I'm here." There was no doubt in my mind, it was from Mia. The rest of the evening felt like a blur. We found a way into the underground foundation through a half-finished maintenance tunnel. The air was damp, and the further we went, the stronger the sense of dread became. It wasn't long before we stumbled across something. A faint light was glowing in the darkness. As we got closer, the light became brighter, illuminating what shouldn't have been there, the mirror. It looked whole, as if it had never shattered. And in its reflection, we saw Mia. She looked just like she always had, but there was something off about her expression. Her lips were moving, but there was no sound. Her hands pressed against the glass as if trying to reach us. "Mia," I shouted, running toward the mirror. "Wait!" Sam grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "What if it's not her? What if it's a trap?" I hesitated. Deep down, I knew he might be right, but I couldn't abandon her. The moment I touched the mirror, the room shifted. It was like being pulled into icy water. Everything went dark for a second, and when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the basement. I was back in Willow Hall. The rooms looked untouched, as though decades of decay had been reversed. Shadows moved along the walls, and faint whispers surrounded me. "Mia," I called out. My voice echoed, but there was no response. I started walking, and the whispers grew louder. The diary's words ran through my mind. You won't be able to leave until you face it. Face what? That's when I saw her. Mia stood at the end of the hallway staring at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her expression was blank, almost doll-like. You shouldn't have come, she said. Mia, we're going to get you out of here, I promised, stepping closer. But she shook her head. It's too late. The mirror. It's not a way out, it's a doorway. They're coming, Emily. Who's coming? I asked, my voice trembling. Before she could answer, the walls began to crack, and the whispers turned into screams. Shadows poured out of every corner, reaching for us. Run, Mia shouted. I grabbed her hand, and we ran toward the entrance. The building twisted around us, as if it were alive, trying to trap us. Doors slammed shut, and windows disappeared. When we finally reached the mirror, Mia stopped. You have to go, she said, her voice breaking. Not without you, I cried. She looked at me sadly. I'm already part of this. But you can still escape. Before I could argue, she pushed me toward the glass. The last thing I saw was her face, smiling faintly as the shadows consumed her. When I woke up, I was lying on the patch of grass where Willow Hall once stood. Sam was shaking me, his face pale. What happened? He asked. She's gone, I whispered. Mia's gone. Even now, years later, I can't explain everything. The mirror was never found, and no one believes our story. But every now and then, when I pass by a reflective surface, I catch a glimpse of Mia. She's still there, watching over me. Or maybe she's waiting for someone else to find the mirror. And I pray no one ever does. Life after that day was never the same. Sam and I decided to keep everything that happened a secret. No one would have believed us anyway, and talking about it only made the memories more vivid, more haunting. But we couldn't fully escape. Mia's disappearance was never solved. Her family eventually moved on, convinced she'd run away under stress. The school erased any record of Willow Hall, turning the land into a garden in memory of students who had gone missing over the years. The whispers in the campus grapevine faded, as all horror stories do. Students no longer feared the building. Instead, they lounged on benches near the garden, unaware of the darkness buried beneath their feet. Sam and I graduated, but neither of us moved far from the town. Some invisible tether kept pulling us back. One summer evening, about 5 years later, I was closing up at the bookstore where I worked. The sun had set, and the streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. As I locked the door, I noticed a figure standing across the street. It was a young woman, wearing an old-fashioned dress, her face partially hidden by the glow of a flickering lamp. My stomach twisted. She looked familiar. Before I could call out, she turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be Mia. But something about her posture, the slight tilt of her head, stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. The next day, I got a text from Sam. We need to talk, it's happening again. When I met Sam at his apartment, his expression confirmed my fears. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of the past had finally caught up with him. She's back, he said, handing me a photo. It was a blurry image of the woman I'd seen outside the bookstore. She stood near the garden where Willow Hall had been, staring directly at the camera. That's her, I whispered. Sam nodded grimly. She's been appearing near the campus for the past few weeks, and it's not just her. He pulled out more photos, each one stranger than the last. Groups of people, all wearing outdated clothes, stood in various parts of the garden. Their expressions were blank, their eyes hollow. It's like the students from the diary, I said, chills running down my spine. That's not all, Sam continued, his voice low. A new mirror appeared in the garden 2 nights ago. We had no choice. If the mirror was back, it meant something, or someone was trying to return. When we arrived at the garden, it was nearly midnight. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers, but the atmosphere felt wrong, as if the space were caught between worlds. In the center of the garden, nestled between rose bushes, was the mirror. It looked exactly as it had the night we found it in the basement, cracked, tarnished, and pulsing faintly with light. "I don't want to do this," I said, my voice shaking. "Neither do I," Sam replied. "But we have to. If it's open again, we need to stop whatever's coming through." We circled the mirror cautiously. Shadows flickered across its surface, though there was no light source nearby. As I stared into the glass, I saw her again. Mia. She was standing behind me, her reflection clearer than mine. "Emily," she whispered, her voice echoing softly. I turned, but no one was there. When I looked back at the mirror, her reflection was gone. Sam's voice broke through my thoughts. "Emily, look at this." He pointed to the base of the mirror, where strange symbols were carved into the frame. They glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the light from the glass. "What is this?" I asked. "Some kind of seal," he replied. "Maybe it's keeping the doorway open." Before we could decide what to do, the mirror began to hum, and the air grew colder. Figures appeared in the glass, those same ghostly students, their hollow eyes locking onto us. Then they stepped through. One by one, the figures emerged from the mirror, their movements slow and jerky, like marionettes on tangled strings. "We need to destroy it," I shouted. Sam picked up a large rock and smashed it against the glass. The mirror cracked, but the figures kept coming. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned and saw Mia, her eyes full of desperation. "You have to finish it," she said. "The diary, only it can close the doorway." The diary. The one Mia had taken years ago. "I don't have it," I cried. Mia smiled faintly. "You've always had it, Emily. You just don't remember." Her words triggered something, a memory buried deep within me. The diary wasn't destroyed because it couldn't be. It was a part of the mirror, a piece of the puzzle that tied it to our world. Without thinking, I ran my hands over the base of the mirror, searching for a hidden compartment. My fingers brushed against something soft and leathery. The diary. It had been there all along, hidden in the frame. I opened it, and the pages flipped on their own, stopping at the final entry. The words glowed, and I read them aloud. "End this chapter. Let the story fade." As I spoke, the mirror began to crack. The figures stopped moving, their forms dissolving into smoke. The light from the mirror grew brighter, and I felt a force pulling me backward. Mia's face appeared one last time in the glass. She was smiling, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. The mirror shattered completely, and everything went still. When I opened my eyes, the garden was empty. The mirror, the figures, even the eerie atmosphere gone. Sam was beside me, breathing heavily. "Is it over?" he asked. "I think so," I replied, though part of me wasn't sure. Mia was gone, but I felt her presence, like a faint warmth lingering in the air. The diary was gone too, its words fading into the ether along with the curse. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. But even now, whenever I see my reflection, I can't help but wonder what happens when the story starts again. The days following the mirror's destruction were quiet, almost unnervingly so. Sam and I promised to stay in touch, but after that night in the garden, we both needed space. The weight of what we'd endured and what we'd lost was too much to face together. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least a version of normal. I moved to a different city, started a new job, and tried to push the memories of Willow Hall and the mirror into a locked corner of my mind. It wasn't easy. Every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing at mirrors longer than I should, searching for something or someone that wasn't there. But Mia never appeared again, and for that, I was both relieved and heartbroken. One evening, months later, I found myself walking through a local park. The air was crisp, the last rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. I sat on a bench and let my thoughts drift, the past creeping in despite my best efforts to keep it away. As the sun set, I noticed something unusual. Across the park, a child was playing with an old ornate hand mirror. Its frame was gilded and tarnished, eerily familiar. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Emily." The voice was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Mia," I whispered, standing up slowly. The child turned, looking at me with a blank expression before running off into the trees. I stayed rooted to the spot, the chill of the past washing over me like a wave. But the child didn't return, and neither did the voice. That night, I decided it was time to let go, truly let go. I lit a candle and sat in front of the only mirror in my apartment. "Mia," I said softly, "if you're still out there, I hope you've found peace. And if you haven't, I hope you'll forgive me for leaving you behind. I miss you, but I need to move forward." The reflection stayed unchanged. No shadows moved, no whispers followed. Just my face, lit by the warm glow of the candle. It was the first time I felt like I'd said goodbye. Years later, Sam and I crossed paths at a coffee shop. We hadn't spoken much since the garden, but seeing him felt like reconnecting with a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. We talked for hours, reminiscing about the good times, skimming over the bad. Before we parted, he asked me something that made my heart skip a beat. "Do you ever wonder if it's really over?" I thought about it for a moment. The mirrors, the shadows, the feeling of being watched, they had all faded with time. But a part of me would always carry the weight of what happened. The memory of Mia and Willow Hall etched into my soul. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I think the story's done. At least for us." Sam smiled faintly. "Let's hope it stays that way." As we left the coffee shop, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm golden light over the street. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The mirror was gone, the curse was broken, and the story finally had come to an end. It was the final day of college, and I was both excited and terrified. The excitement was about what lay ahead, the prospect of a fresh start, new challenges, and the freedom that would come with graduation. The terror, however, was something that came as a creeping feeling I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried to focus on the positive. For years, my friends and I had laughed about how college was the time where anything could happen, but we never imagined we'd end up facing something we could never have planned for. It started off like any other last day, chaotic and nerve-wracking. I had barely slept the night before, preparing for my final exams and thinking about where life was taking me next. But the day turned strange in ways I would never have imagined. The morning was overcast, which felt strange considering it was supposed to be sunny. It's like the weather knew what kind of day we were going to have. I walked into my last exam, feeling the cold air on my skin. I didn't know if I was nervous about the exam itself or just about what came after. But then something else began to happen, something that couldn't be explained away as nerves. As I walked down the corridor of the department's building after the exam, everything seemed to fade around me. The normal sounds of chatting students, the bustling professors, the hum of vending machines, all vanished. The light above flickered. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but then I realized everyone around me seemed oblivious to the change. That's when I first heard the whisper. It wasn't a voice I could make out clearly, but the faintest hint of words echoed in my mind. There was a warning in them, a tone of something coming, something terrifying. "Leave now." At first I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the stress of the day, the kind of exhaustion that makes your mind play tricks. But when I heard it again, this time much clearer, it sent a shiver down my spine. "Leave. It's too late." I froze. The voice wasn't my own mind, it was someone else's. And it was coming from nowhere. Confused and suddenly unnerved, I turned to look at my friends, but when I did, everything changed. I glanced at the building that had been so familiar to me over the last few years. Today, it was different, darker somehow, and I felt it. The air had turned cold. My friends too seemed off. They weren't moving like normal, and they were staring into the distance with an emptiness in their eyes. They looked like they were waiting for something they didn't understand either. "What's wrong with them?" I muttered. A part of me wanted to call out to them, but the moment I turned, the corridor around me shifted again. It felt like something was closing in. The walls began to darken, the overhead lights flickered in rapid succession. It was like an unseen hand was dragging the darkness across the room, suffocating the space around me. I rushed to the doors, pushing them open as fast as I could, trying to escape the impending feeling of dread. As I stumbled outside into the gloomy courtyard, I spotted one of my professors standing at the center, holding an old book close to his chest. He was staring right at me with those eyes I had never seen before, wide, vacant, like he was watching something far beyond me. Something about his look sent my heart pounding in fear, but then the air was cut by another whisper. "Leave now, Emily. They won't make it out." I froze at the mention of my name. The world felt wrong, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The sun was now blocked entirely by thick, swirling clouds. The normal college campus that had felt like a second home suddenly looked like a deserted wasteland. The trees swayed against the unnatural wind, their branches whispering in strange unison. I felt helpless. Something deep inside told me to run, to get away from this place as fast as I could. But where could I even go? I needed answers. And as much as I dreaded it, the only place to get those answers was from the one professor I had always trusted. But as I made my way to the professor's office, the building began to groan. The floors beneath me creaked. The walls in the corridor bent inward, like they were suffocating the hallway. And I could hear it again, the whisper growing louder, "Leave, before it's too late." I stood frozen in the hall, my heart racing as the whisper continued to echo in my mind. It wasn't just a warning now, it was like a command. I felt it down in my bones, something ancient and ominous, pushing me toward a fate I couldn't outrun. But I couldn't just leave, not without understanding what was happening. The finality of it felt wrong. No, I couldn't just leave college, my friends, and my life up in the air without finding it. I turned and ran toward the professor's office, my footsteps echoing in the corridor. Each step seemed slower, heavier, like the air itself was thickening, dragging me down. When I reached the office, I found the door slightly ajar. Hesitant, I pushed it open, the creak of the hinges sounding deafening in the silence. Inside, the professor stood as I'd expected, staring down at the ancient book in his hands. But this time, the light around him bent in strange ways, as though the world was warping. "Professor?" I called out, my voice trembling. He didn't move at first, but when he finally looked up at me, I saw that his eyes were clouded, distant, empty, like there was no soul inside them at all. He wasn't the person I once knew. I've been waiting," he said, his voice hollow, like it was being dragged from somewhere deep, far away. "For you, Emily, for what you have brought with you." I swallowed hard, panic rising in my throat. "What are you talking about? What's going on here? Why is everything so wrong?" His mouth twitched into what could have been a smile, but it didn't look like a smile at all. It was twisted, eerie, and unsettling. "It was always meant to be this way, Emily. You're coming here, your graduation. You've unknowingly set in motion the events of the ending. It's all connected. And you will complete it." Confused, I backed up. "No. What do you mean? I just want to leave. Just tell me what's going on." "You can't run from it," he replied, a note of finality in his voice. "It's too late now. The seals have broken. The ancient forces we've tried to contain for years, they've already found you. It's all coming for you." I looked around the office frantically, but nothing made sense. The light twisted unnaturally, and shadows began stretching into terrifying shapes. The walls pulsated as though the room itself was alive, shrinking inwards, pressing against me. It was like the very air was thick with something malignant, something waiting, and I knew that whatever it was waiting for me to make a decision. "You were never meant to finish college. You were never meant to graduate. You walked right into it, and now, we will all pay the price," the professor continued, his voice fading in and out as though his body wasn't truly there anymore. And just like that, everything clicked into place. The whispered warnings, the unnatural dark clouds, the shifts in reality. It had always been part of something much bigger than any of us could understand. It wasn't about exams or grades or college memories. It was about a twisted destiny pulling me into something much darker than I'd ever imagined. The professor, now more like a shell of himself, took a step forward, his hand reaching out toward me. The room suddenly grew icy cold, and I felt the presence, an invisible, suffocating force closing in. And then the whispers surrounded me, filling my head, growing louder by the second. "It's time." Panic surged within me as everything seemed to close in on me. There was nowhere to run. The ground beneath me rumbled, shaking with a low, thunderous sound. The windows shattered, sending pieces of glass flying like knives. The walls pressed tighter, suffocating me. And at that moment, I understood. The curse of this place was real. The nightmares were not figments of imagination. They were the truth. "Run, Emily, run," someone screamed. A voice, my friends, called from outside the office, but I couldn't turn around. I could feel myself being dragged towards something I couldn't understand, as if I wasn't even controlling my own body anymore. Just as I thought I was lost forever, the door to the office slammed open with a force that almost sent me off my feet. My friends were there, horrified but still human, still alive. They grabbed my arms, pulling me out of the room. I don't know how they pulled me out, but I remember running with them, feeling the cold air biting at my skin, hearing the world around me collapse as we sprinted down the halls. The building was falling apart, the reality itself breaking down like shattered glass. As we stumbled toward the main exit, I heard a final scream from behind, one of terror and despair. We made it outside, the cold wind hitting our faces as we all gasped for breath. We looked back once at the crumbling, distorted campus that had once felt like home, and saw the last remnants of the world collapse in on itself. "Do you think we're safe?" one of my friends asked, their voice shaking, but I knew, deep down, I couldn't answer. We had escaped the building, but not what we'd set in motion. The darkness, the curse, it had followed us out, and we would never be free. Not truly, not ever. We left college behind that day, but it was never really behind us. I don't know what happened to the campus after that, but I could never return. The whispers still find their way to me, in my dreams, in the quiet of the night, in the shadows of everyday life. College was just the beginning. The horrors that lay beneath will follow me forever, and I don't think any of us will be safe as long as that book remains untouched. The end was just another beginning, one I hope I'm not around to see. It was the last day of college. It should have been a day filled with excitement, anticipation for the future, and maybe even some tears of goodbyes. However, what I experienced turned out to be nothing close to any of that. As I walked through the empty halls that morning, everything seemed off, like the world was slowly unraveling before my eyes. The campus was almost deserted, as most of the students had already said their goodbyes and left. Only a few of us remained for final exams or paperwork. I wasn't even sure why I stuck around that last day. Maybe it was the strange magnetic pull the campus had on me. I'd grown so used to these people, this place, that I didn't want to let go. But the ominous feeling crept in the moment I walked into the library to finish an essay. There was something eerie about the space that used to be so warm and welcoming. The air felt heavier, and there was an odd stillness that made me feel watched. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was just tired. It was an emotional day. Saying goodbye had felt more final than I anticipated. I sat down at one of the study tables, trying to focus on my work, but my thoughts kept drifting. The tapping of someone's shoes echoed softly in the hallway just outside the library, even though there shouldn't have been anyone around. Curious, I glanced out the window. A lone figure stood just under the shadows, facing the building. It felt like something out of a nightmare, only the figure wasn't moving. That's when it happened, the loud bang of a door slamming shut somewhere on the floor above. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. What could cause that kind of noise? Suddenly, the library lights flickered and then shut off. A cold chill swept over the room as a soft whisper echoed in my ears, the voice so faint I almost thought I imagined it. "Get out." My blood ran cold. I hastily grabbed my things and bolted out of the library, not daring to glance back. The hallway, however, was unnervingly silent. I could have sworn I heard footsteps following behind me, yet when I turned around, no one was there. I made my way to the dorms, trying to shake off the feeling of unease, but as soon as I reached the building, I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, an unexpected welcome that didn't fit the usual security measures. I pushed the door open with trepidation. What I saw inside sent chills down my spine. The hallway was lined with doors wide open, yet the rooms were entirely empty, like they had been vacated overnight. But what struck me more was the pervasive silence, too deep, too suffocating for any normal college dorm. When I stepped forward, I heard something crack underfoot. Looking down, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat, a strange symbol drawn on the floor in what appeared to be dark ink or something worse. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, when I noticed that in the far distance, at the end of the corridor, someone stood at the very last door. They were facing away from me, but there was something disturbingly unnatural about their posture. They weren't breathing, they weren't moving. Then they turned slowly. That's when I saw it, their eyes wide, blank, lifeless, staring right at me. It was as if they were pleading, their mouth hanging open as though they wanted to scream but couldn't. That's when I snapped out of my daze. I ran faster than I thought possible, through the empty hallways, barely stopping to breathe. I bolted for the exit of the building. The fresh air felt like a lifeline, but even then, I could still sense something watching me, something lurking in the shadows. Outside, the world hadn't returned to normal. The sky seemed heavier, like it was closing in on me. I didn't care about graduating or finishing my essay anymore. I just needed to get away from that place, that eerie campus that no longer felt like home. As I reached the parking lot, I realized something worse than fear lingered inside me. A terrible certainty that it wasn't over. The final day of college wasn't supposed to be a horror story. It was supposed to be the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. But something had gone wrong, and I wasn't sure if I was ever going to be free of whatever had been unleashed. I sprinted across the parking lot, not daring to look back. Every footstep felt like it could be my last, every breath ragged and panicked. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and quickly locked myself inside, trying to steady my shaking hands. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone behind me. The road to the outskirts of campus seemed endless, like a dark tunnel closing in around me. I pressed the gas pedal harder, the tires screeching against the pavement. The once familiar streets were now disorienting, stretching in ways that didn't seem possible. I barely noticed the time ticking by, but soon I realized that no matter how fast I drove, the campus was still haunting me, still clinging to my thoughts. Then the phone buzzed in my pocket. It startled me, and I almost crashed the car as I fumbled to pull it free. My heart stopped as I saw the notification, message from College Dean. I pulled over to the side of the road, unable to keep driving anymore. I hesitated before opening the message, but a creeping sense of dread forced my hand. "Emily," the message began, "we need you to come back to campus immediately. It's too late. The ceremony, the one you think was supposed to be your graduation, it's not a ceremony at all. We didn't realize, but something evil is awake. You're the last one left. You can still stop it." I stared at the message, my hands freezing as the phone slipped from my grip. I couldn't process the words, couldn't understand. Something evil? What the hell was going on? As I tried to catch my breath, my car's engine sputtered for a moment and the lights flickered. And then something even worse happened. The radio, which I had not turned on, suddenly crackled to life. A voice came through, chilling, raspy, as if it was speaking through a forgotten, haunted frequency. "You can't escape. It's already here. It will find you, no matter where you run. You belong to it now." My heart nearly stopped. I turned the car back on, and as if in a haze, drove straight through the night. The road before me felt like an endless spiral that refused to lead to the safety of freedom. When I finally reached my home hours later, exhausted and completely broken, the exhaustion quickly turned to terror once more. As I stepped into my front door, I immediately noticed that the house was eerily silent. No light in the hallway, no comforting hum of appliances, only darkness. A deep, oppressive darkness that seemed to choke the air itself. It wasn't until I stepped into the living room that I felt the chill again, the same cold from the library, from the dorm, and that was when I heard the whisper once more. Only this time, It wasn't in the library. It was in my own home, right behind me. "Emily," it whispered, the voice sending shivers down my spine. I whirled around to find the same shadowy figure that had been standing in the dorm hall. Its eyes, those lifeless, pleading eyes, bore into mine as it took one slow step forward, then another. I ran, not knowing where I was headed, but desperate to escape. It was too late. As I bolted through the house, I could hear more whispers, strange movements that made the air feel alive with something vile, something that would never let me go. I stumbled upon the old photograph hanging on the wall near the door. A photo taken from the first day of college, the first day I had arrived. But something was different about it now, something I hadn't noticed before. I squinted. In the shadows behind me, there was another figure in the frame, an outline I didn't remember, and that's when I realized my reflection in the photo wasn't mine. It was the figure that had haunted me the entire day. It had followed me. Before I could scream, everything went black. The next morning, they found my car on the side of the road, abandoned. No one ever saw me again. The campus, though, still stood, empty, quiet, with nothing but the lingering whisper of its secrets. Sometimes, they say they hear a new haunting message on the radio in the dead of night. Sometimes, they say Emily is still out there, waiting to come home, but she never will.